Well, good evening. Welcome to the kitchen table devotions again in this Thursday evening. The last several weeks we've been talking about women of the Bible and the important roles that they played in the development of our faith because of the acts that they committed and went through. We can have our faith and we can know Jesus face to face, and we can have that personal relationship with God because of the things that they endured to share their faith with others. This morning, not this morning, but this evening, the woman we're going to talk about tonight comes from 2 Kings chapter 5. And this is the only place her name is mentioned, and then only just for a brief few words. There are only 20 words that she speaks here in chapter 5 of 2 Kings. And yet, even though she doesn't say much and she's not described a whole lot, we can deduce some things from her because of where she came from and some of the things that she participated in. We can understand and have a pretty good idea of some of the things that she caused to come about. Now, her name isn't mentioned. It's one of those nameless women, as so many of the names of the women in the Bible go by other names other than just a typical name like yours or mine. In this instance, this woman's name, and the only way that she's known, is the Maid of Naamans' wife. The Maid of Naamans' wife. That's her name. That's how we know about her, or what her name is. Now, Naaman, just to refresh your memory about Naaman if you're not familiar with him, or let you know about who he was. Naaman was a great military commander of the king of Syria's army, or the Aramean army as they were known in the ancient days. He won many victories, and he was just a powerful man and a great man of integrity. He had a weakness, though. He had a terrible infirmity. It was an awful skin disease that was very prevalent in that day. He had leprosy, or what they deemed as leprosy in that day, which was very painful, and it was also associated with death. One night, an Aramean raiding party crossed the border between Syria and Samaria. They were adjacent to one another, and they shared a common border, and oftentimes the Syrian army would perform raids over into Samaria. Well, on this particular night, they took a young Jewish girl captive to serve Naaman's wife. The maid learned of Naaman's, this mighty commander. She learned of his leprosy, this terrible skin disease. And she said to her mistress, or Naaman's wife, "If only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." And this prophet that's in Samaria, a great man of God by the name of Elisha. And we'll talk about him in a moment, just very briefly. But this maid, even though she was taken out of her land and carried away into captivity and taken away from everything that she knew and loved and cared about, and carried away into a foreign land where everything was new to her, and put to work as a slave or as the servant or the maid of the commander of the king's army in Syria. She probably witnessed her family being killed. before she was taken away into captivity. After all, this was a raid, and when they raided places, they didn't. There was often a lot of violence involved in those things. So everything that she really knew and cared about was left behind as they carried her away. But even in her captivity, she didn't seem to be bitter or rebellious. Instead, she had the confidence of her mistress, of the woman that she served. And it's also evident that she was a believer in Jehovah God, because she believed in the man of God in Samaria, the great prophet Elisha. And she cared enough about her master, even in her circumstances. She cared enough about her master that she desired to see him healed or cleansed of his infirmity. And so she told Naaman's wife about seeing this prophet, this man of God, that if only Naaman would see him, that he could be cleansed or healed. And so Naaman's wife told him what the maid said, that if he would just go and see Elisha the prophet, that he could be cured of this leprosy. So Naaman got excited on hearing that there was a cure for him. And so he went to the king of the Syrian army, or the Aramean army, or the king of Syria, and asked him if he for permission to go. And of course the king of Syria gave him his blessing, along with a letter to show the king of Samaria. And he gave him a bunch of treasure to go to take with him as well. And so Naaman headed off for Samaria then, with the letter from the king and a lot of treasure to give to the man who could heal him of this leprosy. Well, he went to the king of Samaria and gave him the letter, and the king got all excited. He didn't know what to do. He said, "I'm not God. I can't do that." And Elisha heard about the king's plight, and he said, "Send him to me. Send Naaman to me." And so the king sent Naaman to Elisha's house. And Naaman went off with his entourage, and carrying all the treasure with him, and in great pomp and circumstances arrived at Elisha's house and announced that he was there. Elisha never left the house to go out and to greet him. Instead, he sent his servant Gehazi out to greet Naaman. And Gehazi told Naaman that the prophet said, "You just need to go down to the Jordan River and dip yourself 7 times in the Jordan River. And if you do that, if you wash 7 times in the Jordan River, your skin will be restored and you will be cleansed. You'll be made whole." Naaman took great offense at the prophet, since the prophet didn't come out to greet him. And he said to his servants that were with him, he said, "Our rivers are much better in Aram. Why did we have to come here? If that's all we had to do is just go down and wash 7 times in this river here, we could have stayed home and washed in much better water." And he was ready to leave. He was angry. And his servants talked to him and said, "Naaman, listen, if that prophet would have come out and waved his hands over you and said some fancy words and told you to do something difficult, you would have done it and you wouldn't have thought anything about it. Instead, he asked you to do something easy, something simple. Why don't you listen to him?" And so Naaman went to the Jordan River and washed 7 times in the Jordan. And sure enough, his flesh was restored and he was cleansed. he was healed and cured and made whole. Then he went back to Elijah. And he tried to give Elijah some of that treasure that he brought with him to pay whoever would cure him of that leprosy. But Elijah refused to accept anything from Naaman for ministering to him. The man of God refused anything to pay for his ministry. And Naaman replied, well, if you won't accept anything from me, let me be given enough earth from Samaria here, enough earth from Israel here, that 2 mules can carry, that I can take with me back to Syria, so that I can always have a part of Samaria or part of Israel with me. For never again will I make sacrifices or burnt offerings to any other god but the Lord, who is the one and only true God in all of the world. And Elijah replied, go in peace. Go in peace. Now, we don't know how Naaman felt about his wife's maid after he was healed and after he found the Lord. We don't know. We can only assume that he was very generous to her and rewarded her greatly, because he was very generous to Elisha, or at least to Elijah's servant, which is another story in its own. So we don't know how he felt about the servant girl who sent him away to be cured. We do know that in spite of the maid of Naaman's wife losing everything that she loved, even though she was captive, she still had the love and grace of God in her to tell others about the saving grace of the one true God. The story really shows us, doesn't it, that it matters not what has happened to us or where we are in life, or about what our circumstances are or what we're going through. We can still share our faith and the love of God with others wherever we're at. Wherever we're at. Something to think about, isn't it? So as far as it depends on you this week, live in peace, the peace of Christ. Amen.